since we're talking about taxes, I want to touch on this because I mentioned this. There were a lot of idiots out there when the IRS was given more funding in the Inflation Reduction Act. It was $80 million, $80 billion over the course of 10 years, in part to hire new IRS staff. And it was, of course, over 10 years. Now they've pulled back like 20 billion of that, but that's on the back end. So again, it's not necessarily
part of the budget deal.
Yep. We'll see whether or not that stays in, but now it's there. And at the time, Janet Yellen had promised, we are not going to use this funding to go after people who make less than $400,000. And all you needed to do was to look at a graph. And you can see that as IRS funding was cut and cut and cut, the percentage of wealthy people who were audited went down relative to people who are not wealthy, which is the vast majority of the country. Because it's far more expensive to go after wealthy people because they have lawyers and accountants and they have sophisticated mechanisms in which to avoid taxes. But if you got the money and you got the agents and you got the time, it's also pretty lucrative to go after them.
Mm-hmm.
Because right now, even now, every dollar you spend on the IRS gets you $6 in return. On Thursday, and I say idiots because, of course, the right has talked about abolishing the IRS for a long time. They hate taxes because taxes are the foundation of a functioning society that is the first step in creating any type of equity or stability in a society.
It's the foundation of government.
It's
they don't want govern to govern.
Distribution.
Government to govern. Yep.
It is wealth distribution. That is the mechanism in which you do this. Now, there's other mechanisms you could have, which is like we're going to nationalize certain assets, et cetera, et cetera. But for a country that is not fully socialist or communist, taxes are it. And in addition to it, obviously, of giving our money value as well. On Thursday, the IRS outlined its plans for the funding, as well as its efforts to burnish the agency's customer service operations after the delays of the pandemic. They rolled out a thing this time, and I don't know if people used it, but there are 12 states across the country where they basically rolled out their own TurboTax thing, and all the reviews on it were really great. IRA money helped IRS answer more taxpayer calls during the tax season that just ended on April 15th, as well as beefing up enforcement, which led to the collection of $520 million from wealthy taxpayers who hadn't filed their taxes or still owed money. The strategic plan over the next 3 tax years include a sharp increase in audits, although the agency reiterated it won't boost its enforcement for people who earn less than $400,000, which covers the bulk of U.S. taxpayers. The IRS plans to triple the audit rates on large corporations with assets of more than $250 million. Audit rates for these companies will rise to 22.6% in tax year 2026 from 8.8% in 2019. Let me repeat, that's almost a tripling of the audit rates from where we were in 2019. Large partnerships with assets of more than $10 million will see their audit rates increase tenfold, rising from 1% in tax year 2026 from 0.1% in 2019. Wealthy individuals with a total positive income of more than $10 million will see their audit rates rise 50%, from 11% in 2019 to 16.5% in 2026. The head of the agency said there's no new wave of audits coming from middle or low-income individuals coming from mom and pops. That's not in our plans. And just to give you a sense of perspective here, in the mid-1990s, the IRS employed more than 100,000 people. That was when we had 230 million people in the country. Its workforce dropped to 73,000 workers in 2019 due to retirements and prior funding cuts.
Yeah.
And retirements that were not funded to be replaced. The agency has now boosted its workforce to 90,000 full-time equivalent employees, and it plans to expand to about 102,000 over the next few years. That would take us to where we were in the mid-90s, with a population 2/3 the size of what it is today. That's well below the numbers from the 80s and the 90s. We got to get the IRS up there. We should have 150,000 IRS workers.
Do you mean jackbooted thugs?
And we should buy them jackboots.
But what's amazing is it's actually the opposite, right? Like previously the IRS was going after the small fish, which is more how like a street cop would behave versus, think of it in that way, cops policing neighborhoods where they feel like they can get guys on low-level drug possession versus when you fund, say, detective work going after big companies and auditing them. That's, I think, a good way for people to visualize.
Yeah. Now, there isn't any more or less people going after people who haven't paid their taxes, who are, not millionaires or 100,000-aires. It's just that, and there's never been a huge enforcement on that group of people. Mm-hmm. But it's just as a percentage, it was higher because every time when you cut the workforce by 30% over the course of 10 or 15 years, every time you cut one of those people, you were cutting enforcement on wealthy people. That was the plan. That's why it was done. And so anybody who tells you that hiring more IRS agents is a bad thing and if they're not a self-professed, I think full-on communist who think that there shouldn't be an IRS, we should simply have no private ownership of property, which...
I don't go that far.
Yeah, exactly. It can only...
What we need is less IRS agents and more Kyle Rittenhouses, okay?
Exactly. I mean... then they're just right-wingers.
Yeah.
That's it.
And maybe they have like a vested interest in it. I mean, when you hear we know
who knows what they're.
But the Republicans are representing a certain class of people who are threatened by them.
Scammers and tax cheats,
right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
Or sorry, entrepreneurs.
Exactly. They're just innovators. Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.